They paid new hires 40% more than me. I remember the exact moment the truth burned through me. One accidental spreadsheet, one careless click, and suddenly everything I'd built over 9 loyal years collapsed into a single humiliating number. I didn't shout. I didn't break. I went quiet, the kind of quiet that makes people nervous. Because in that silence, something inside me shifted, and I realized they had no idea what I was capable of. If you've ever felt undervalued, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe if you want to hear how I turned this betrayal into my power. I was halfway through my morning coffee when the email hit my inbox. A routine HR update, or so I thought. I opened it casually, expecting another reminder about timesheets or open enrollment. Instead, a spreadsheet burst onto my screen, rows and columns full of numbers that didn't belong to me. At first, I blinked, thinking I had clicked the wrong file. But no, it was real. Aitana Reyes, 9 years at the company, buried on page 3 with a salary that suddenly felt like a slap across the face. $98,750. A number I had been proud of once. A number I had earned through late nights, impossible deadlines, and crises only I knew how to fix. But then I saw the rest. Liam Peters, 14 months at the company, earning $136,000. Tessa Grant, barely 8 months in, making $142,500. Nolan Pierce, the guy who still asked me how to run basic data reconciliation, pulling in a salary almost 40% higher than mine. Every line I scrolled felt like someone pressing a thumb harder against a bruise. I sat there staring, heat rising slowly up my neck. Not anger yet, just disbelief. I refreshed the screen as if the numbers would shift back into something rational. They didn't. That's when the office noise faded out. The clicking keyboards, the ringing phones, even the chatter from the sales team arguing about weekend plans. All of it turned to static. My world narrowed to a spreadsheet that was never meant for my eyes. Then came the recall email. Kyle from HR desperately trying to yank the file back from the entire department. I watched it pop up in real time, a futile attempt, because I had already downloaded the spreadsheet and saved it. Not to my company folder, to my personal drive. I didn't slam my laptop. I didn't storm off or make a scene. Instead, I stood up slowly, my legs steady in a way that felt foreign. For 9 years, I had told myself I was patient, loyal, grateful. But in that moment, I understood the truth. I had been convenient. A quiet workhorse who kept entire systems afloat without ever demanding the recognition they handed out so freely to people who had never carried half my load. I walked straight to Damon Holt's office. No calendar invitation, no heads up. I knocked twice, then opened the door before he could pretend to be busy. He looked up, surprised and annoyed. "Aitana, is something wrong?" I didn't answer with words at first. I simply placed my laptop on his desk, turning it to face him with the spreadsheet open at full brightness. His eyes flicked to the screen for half a second, just long enough. That tiny widening of his expression told me everything. He knew, and worse, he expected me to swallow it. "Aitana," he sighed, already slipping into that tired managerial tone. "You know I can't discuss other employees' compensation." "I'm not asking about theirs," I said quietly. "I'm asking why mine is the lowest number in a department I built from scratch." He leaned back, steepling his fingers, the posture of a man who believed he held all the power. "Market conditions have changed since you were hired. New roles come in differently. It's policy." Policy. The word tasted like dust. "So adjust it," I said. "It's not that simple," he replied. "Take it or leave it." The moment he said those 4 words, something in me broke. But it wasn't my confidence. It was my tolerance. And he had no idea what that shift was about to cost him. I didn't leave Damon's office right away. I stood there for a full breath, letting his words settle, testing whether he would realize how reckless they sounded. He didn't. He just glanced at his monitor, already moving on as if the conversation were over and I was supposed to walk away quietly like I always had. But I wasn't the same person who'd walked in. I closed my laptop gently, not slamming it, not making a scene, because I wanted him to look at me. not the noise. "I'd like to request a formal compensation review," I said. My voice didn't shake. His eyebrows lifted slightly, as though I'd asked for something outrageous instead of the bare minimum any professional deserved. "I can submit it," he said, already shaking his head, "but it won't be approved. We completed annual reviews last quarter. You received your standard 3% increase." 3%, a number that now felt like an insult wrapped in corporate politeness. Damon checked his watch, a gesture so dismissive it felt intentional. Was there anything else? There it was, the humiliation. Not loud, not sharp, not dramatic, quiet, casual, the kind that lands deeper because it's clear the other person doesn't see you as someone worth even pretending to respect. I walked out without a word, but the shame clung to me like static. I could feel it in the stares that followed me back to my desk. People sensed something was wrong, even if they didn't know what. When I sat down, my hands hovered over my keyboard, but I couldn't type. My chest felt tight, squeezed by 9 years of swallowing my frustration and calling it professionalism. I opened the spreadsheet again, staring at the rows of salaries that made my loyalty feel foolish. I remembered the late nights I'd spent patching broken routing systems while others were home with their families. I remembered covering for teammates who weren't ready, training analysts who now outranked me, catching massive vendor errors that saved the company from public embarrassment. And Damon had looked me in the eyes and said, "Take it or leave it." That was when something inside me shifted. Not anger yet, not revenge, just a clarity I had never allowed myself to feel. I shut my laptop a second time, stood, and walked toward HR. Trevor from HR looked startled when I stepped into his doorway. "Aitana, hi, everything okay?" "I need to speak with you about internal pay structures," I said. His smile faltered. He gestured me in quickly, closing the door behind us. I told him what I'd found. Not the whole spreadsheet, just enough to test whether he would acknowledge the disparity. He didn't deny it. He didn't even pretend to be shocked. Instead, he gave me the same script Damon had used, almost word for word. Market conditions, banding, policy, timing, can't make exceptions. It was rehearsed, practiced, institutional. I realized then that nothing about this was an accident. They had known for years that I was underpaid. They had chosen to leave me there. When I pushed harder, Trevor's tone shifted from gentle to firm, not angry, controlled. "Aitana, you need to be careful not to misinterpret internal data. Discussing others' pay is not grounds for renegotiation." "It is when the gap is 40%, I said. His smile flattened. "You're a valued team member, but we all have to stay within policy." Valued, policy, words that meant nothing. I thanked him for his time, walked out of the office, and felt the humiliation settle deeper. But beneath it, something else was forming, something steadier, stronger, a resolve I didn't fully recognize yet. They thought I'd drop it. They thought I'd accept my place. They had no idea what I was already planning. I drove home that evening without turning on the radio, letting the silence fill every corner of my car. Humiliation has a way of echoing long after the moment passes, and mine replayed on a loop. Damon checking his watch, Trevor handing me pre-packaged excuses, the way everyone seemed to expect me to accept whatever scraps they offered. But shame wasn't the only thing sitting with me. Underneath it, something sharper had begun to form, a kind of cold clarity that felt almost dangerous. By the time I walked through my front door, kicked off my shoes, and sat at my kitchen table, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I opened my laptop, not to complain or draft a polite follow-up email, but to begin documenting the truth, the story of my 9 years at the company, stripped of every bit of modesty I had been conditioned to maintain. People in the comments often ask how I found the strength to fight back. The truth is, strength didn't show up like a lightning strike. It arrived slowly the moment I stopped minimizing what I had built. I started from the beginning, year one, when I took a chaotic data tracking system and reorganized it into a platform the entire division still used. I wrote about the vendor compliance framework I created from scratch, the one that kept us from failing a federal audit. I wrote about the nights I stayed until midnight fixing routing breakdowns, while the people now earning more than me were long gone. The more I wrote, the more I remembered the crises I had quietly prevented. The time a major vendor submitted a duplicate invoice worth $78,000, and no one noticed until I flagged it. The quarter when a reporting glitch threatened to misstate our financials by millions. The dozens of new analysts I trained, guided step by step, even when they arrived with salaries that dwarfed mine. I wrote until my fingers ached, until the sun dipped low and my kitchen light cast long, strange shadows across the room. And then I kept writing. Page after page, I pieced together a timeline so detailed it felt more like a forensic report than a resume. I didn't embellish anything. I didn't need to. The facts spoke loudly enough. They revealed a pattern I had long ignored. I wasn't just an employee. I had become the institutional memory of an entire division, the person whose work everyone depended on, but no one truly saw. I titled the document, "The Cost of a Lost Architect." 43 pages. When I finished, I leaned back in my chair, feeling something shift inside me. This wasn't a plea for validation. It was evidence, undeniable, irrefutable evidence of my value and the cost of their negligence. I saved the file, then printed a clean copy at the 24-hour cafe down the street. I stood at the counter as the printer hummed, spitting out page after page, the soft glow of the machine illuminating the words I had never allowed myself to say out loud. When it finished, I slipped the pages into a leather binder I bought years ago for a future opportunity I thought might never come. On my drive home, the binder sat in the passenger seat like a silent promise. I knew what would happen if I brought it to Damon. He would dismiss it, minimize it, call it unnecessary, so I wouldn't take it to him. I was done talking to people who saw me as replaceable. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. I showered, pulled my hair back neatly, and put on the sharpest outfit I owned, because I wanted to feel like someone who had finally stopped apologizing for her own worth. As I buckled my shoes, a strange calm washed over me. I wasn't going to fight for scraps anymore. I was going to show them exactly what it looked like when the person holding the entire structure together decided to step away. And trust me, nothing terrifies a company more than realizing how much they depend on the very person they refuse to value. I arrived at the office before anyone else, the sky still a soft blue-gray that made the building look almost innocent, as if it hadn't been the setting of my 9-year slow-burn betrayal. The halls were silent as I walked through them, my heels clicking in a rhythm that felt steadier than my heartbeat. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't even angry anymore. What I felt was purpose, cold, sharp, precise. I went straight to Spencer Callahan's office, our CEO, knowing he arrived around 6:30 every morning. The executive floor smelled like expensive carpeting and artificial lavender, nothing like the coffee and recycled air of my division downstairs. His assistant's desk was empty, the nameplate gleaming under the early light. Perfect. I pushed open his door gently. Spencer looked up from a folder, his silver hair brushed perfectly into place even at this hour. He blinked, surprised to see me. "Hey, Tana?" I stepped inside without hesitation and placed 3 items neatly on his desk. My leather-bound binder, my resignation letter, and the offer letter from Atlas Nexus, the fastest-growing competitor in our industry. He stared at them, then at me. "What is this?" "My transition plan," I said. "You should read it." I didn't stay to watch him. I left the office with the same calm I walked in with and headed to my own desk. For the next 2 hours, I worked as if nothing were out of the ordinary, answering emails, reviewing routing data, even helping Nolan troubleshoot a problem he should have been able to solve himself. My chest thrummed with adrenaline, but my face stayed polite, neutral. At 9:30 on the dot, my phone rang. I didn't need to see the caller ID to know who it was. "Tana, could you come to the CEO's office?" Spencer's voice was tight, clipped. "Of course," I said. This time, the executive floor wasn't silent. Whispers echoed from desks, people suddenly very interested in spreadsheets that were obviously blank. Inside the office, 4 people waited for me. Spencer, COO Damon Holt, HR Director Trevor, and CFO Marissa Lane. My binder lay open on the table, pages splayed like the wings of a bird mid-flight. "Close the door," Spencer said. I did. He gestured to a chair, but I stayed standing. If I sat, I'd be at their level. I had no intention of being anyone's subordinate in this room. "We've reviewed your document," Spencer began. "It's quite detailed." "It's accurate," I replied. He cleared his throat. "There appears to be a misunderstanding about internal compensation structure." "There's no misunderstanding," I said. "There's a gap of almost 40% between me and people I trained. That's not structure. That's negligence." Damon shifted uncomfortably, his confidence from the day before nowhere to be found. Trevor dabbed sweat from his forehead. Marissa avoided eye contact entirely. I let the silence stretch. People underestimate silence, but it tells you everything: who breaks first, who squirms, who hides. Finally, Spencer leaned forward. "What would it take for you to reconsider your resignation?" This was the moment I had prepared for. I met his eyes without blinking. 50,000 salary adjustment, retroactive compensation for the past year's gap, a company-wide pay equity evaluation conducted by an external firm, and a guaranteed role transition that reflects my scope of work. Trevor choked on his breath. Damon looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. Spencer's expression didn't change, but I saw the tension around his jaw. "Those are extraordinary demands," he said. "So is building the foundation of this company's vendor integrity systems while being paid like an entry-level analyst," I replied. Another long silence. Outside the glass walls, I could see people pretending not to watch, eyes flicking up from their screens every few seconds. "Give us 24 hours, Spencer finally said. "We'll prepare a formal response." I nodded once. "I should remind you my resignation is effective in 2 weeks. The knowledge required to maintain your systems requires a 60-day transfer. You have 24 hours to decide how that gap will be handled." Damon flinched. They weren't stupid. They understood exactly what I was saying. I could walk away and leave them with the chaos they allowed to grow. As I turned to leave, Marissa spoke for the first time. "Aitana, who made you the offer?" "Atlas Nexus," I said. "Their VP of Network Integrity, Celeste Ford, reached out." I didn't miss the way Spencer's face drained of color. Celeste had left our company 5 years ago after facing the same treatment I just had, and now she was waiting for me. I walked out of the office feeling the shift, subtle but unmistakable. For the first time in 9 years, the power wasn't on their side. It was in my hands. Walking out of that meeting, I felt a strange quiet settle over me. Not relief, not victory, just focus. The kind of focus you feel when you know you've stepped onto a battlefield you've already mapped out in your head. My plan wasn't just about pay anymore. It hadn't been for a long time, though I hadn't fully admitted that to myself until now. Because behind the scenes, buried deep in our vendor logs, something far uglier had been growing for almost 2 years, and I had been the only one who noticed. It started with a small anomaly, one vendor submission that didn't match its authorization trail. A tiny inconsistency most people would overlook, but I'd built this system. I knew its pulse, its rhythm, its breathing. When something was off, I could feel it almost instinctively. So I traced that one anomaly. It led to another and another. 18 months of late-night checking, pattern tracking, and organizing numbers in ways no one else would have thought to do. I hadn't told anyone, not Damon, not Trevor, not Marissa, definitely not Spencer. Because every time I had brought concerns forward in the past, they'd brushed me off, insisting everything was approved at the executive level. And if the rot was inside the executive level, who exactly was I supposed to trust? Back then, I didn't know what I was dealing with. But a few months ago, things became clearer, too clear to ignore. Payments routed through shell vendors, invoices approved outside normal channels, signatures that didn't match their digital certificates, fake consulting firms that had no phone numbers, no websites, no employees. Money being siphoned off in quiet, calculated increments, not enough in one place to trigger alarms, but enough over time to add up to something big. Every time I stumbled onto another piece of the pattern, I told myself I needed to wait, to watch, to understand the full shape of what I was dealing with. Then came the day Celeste Ford reached out from Atlas Nexus, offering me coffee, not a job. We sat in a quiet cafe, and something about the way she looked at me told me she already knew pieces of the truth. "You're good at finding things other people miss," she said gently. "If you ever decide to leave, make sure you take the truth with you." I didn't understand her fully at the time, but her words lingered, like someone handing me a flashlight before I even realized I was walking into a cave. After that, I documented everything. I separated the fraudulent vendor strings into labeled folders. I created routing diagrams tracing every suspicious payment. I generated time-stamped logs of accesses that didn't make sense. I even compiled a comparison chart showing which executives approved which payments and how those payments aligned with the network of shell vendors. I didn't know who the puppet master was yet, but I could feel the pattern tightening. Someone inside my company had built a private pipeline of cash, using the very system I designed. Someone who thought I'd never question them. Someone who believed I'd never have the power to expose them. And now, after that meeting upstairs, they still had no idea I'd been quietly building the one thing they couldn't bury: the truth. I returned to my desk, opened my encrypted folder, and stared at the web of evidence. I knew the moment was coming, the moment I'd stop watching and start acting. For 9 years, they'd underestimated me. They were about to learn exactly how big that mistake really was. The next morning, I didn't wait for Spencer's 24 hours to run out. I'd given them enough time already, 9 years of it. Instead, I emailed the board chair, Helena Brooks, requesting an emergency review of critical system irregularities requiring executive attention. I attached nothing. A blank subject line with a warning is more effective than a full explanation, and Helena was smart enough to recognize the weight of those words. By noon, Spencer himself appeared at my desk, trying hard to look composed but failing. "Aitana," he said stiffly, "conference room 3 now." Perfect. When I walked in, the entire top layer of leadership was there. Spencer, Damon, Marissa, Trevor, and, across the screen, Helena and 2 other board members. A few analysts lingered outside, pretending to walk by slowly enough to catch shadows of the chaos brewing inside. I closed the door behind me, placed my binder on the table, and stood. I didn't take a seat. "All right," Helena said crisply. "You requested a review. Let's begin." I opened the binder to the tab marked Routing Irregularities and slid copies of my condensed 15-page summary across the table. For the past 18 months, I've been tracking a pattern of unauthorized vendor transactions, small enough to avoid immediate detection, but collectively significant. These payments bypassed normal approval channels and were repeatedly justified under executive preclearance, though no documentation exists to support those claims. Damon shifted first. His jaw twitched. Spencer's eyes narrowed. "How significant?" Helena asked. $2.7 million, I replied. The room cracked open then. Not literally, but the silence was so heavy, it felt like the walls themselves pulled back. Marissa went pale. Trevor swallowed hard. Damon's whole posture tightened as if bracing for an explosion. "This is outrageous," Spencer said finally. "You're suggesting internal fraud?" "I'm not suggesting," I said, keeping my tone even. "I'm presenting evidence." I clicked my remote and the screen behind me lit up. A full routing map. Ivory lines, red nodes, access timestamps, digital signatures, payment trails. A spider web of theft hidden in plain sight. "Each vendor listed here as a shell company," I continued. "No staff, no operating history, no legitimate paperwork. But all payments lead back to a single holding firm, Redwood Consultancy Partners." I turned one page further. "Registered under the name Adrian Whitlock." Marissa gasped. "That's my brother-in-law," Damon finished for her, his voice brittle. Every board member leaned forward. "You expect us to believe," Spencer snapped, "that our COO would risk his entire career funneling money through?" "He didn't sign the transfers," I said. but he approved the authorizations that made them possible. Damon's face drained of color. I didn't know. You didn't ask, I interrupted. You approved every flagged request without verifying a single line item. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than anger. We will need to adjourn until legal counsel is present, Trevor said shakily. This isn't appropriate without— Sit down, Trevor, Helena said sharply. Ms. Reyes, continue. Damon's mask finally cracked. This is a distortion, he stammered. These could be clerical errors. $2.7 million worth of clerical errors? I asked, all routed to your brother-in-law's company? His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Spencer scrubbed a hand over his face, suddenly looking older. The board conferred in urgent whispers. I stood still, watching the tower of authority they had built for themselves tilt and fracture. When Helena finally spoke, her voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. Effective immediately, we are suspending COO Damon Holt pending full forensic investigation. Security is en route. Damon shot to his feet. You can't. But security was already at the door. As they escorted him out, he looked back at me, eyes burning with a mix of shock and hatred. He had spent years underestimating me. Now he finally understood the cost. I gathered my binder, nodded to Helena, and walked out. Behind me, a dynasty of arrogance fell apart in a single afternoon. When I stepped out of that conference room, the air felt different, lighter, sharper, almost electric. Word spread through the building faster than any internal memo. People whispered my name in hallways, some out of shock, others out of relief, because deep down, they knew something had been rotting inside this place for a long time. I didn't linger. I packed my things quietly, the same way I'd carried this company for years, without noise, without recognition. By the time I reached the parking lot, my phone buzzed. It was Celeste from Atlas Nexus. Is it done? She asked. It's begun, I said. 2 days later, I signed my new contract, Vice President of Network Integrity, a role built around transparency, accuracy, and worth, the three things my old company never valued. My signing bonus equaled every cent stolen through the shell firms. Poetic in a way. In my first month, I led a full overhaul of the vendor verification systems. In my second month, we onboarded 3 major clients, all fleeing the instability my old company tried so desperately to hide. And somewhere along the way, I realized something simple but powerful. Walking away wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of who I should have been all along. If you've ever stayed somewhere that underestimated you, let my story be a reminder. You're not asking for too much. You're asking from the wrong people. Tell me in the comments if you've ever had to walk away from a place that didn't see your worth. And if you want more stories like this, make sure you subscribe. There's one truth I didn't fully understand until everything fell apart. Sometimes the hardest healing doesn't come from fighting. It comes from walking away. For years, I thought endurance made me strong. I believed that absorbing disrespect was the cost of professionalism, that staying loyal meant I was doing the right thing. But loyalty becomes self-betrayal when the people you give it to have no intention of giving anything back. That realization changes you. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly. Like waking up and realizing the air you've been breathing was thinner than you ever noticed. When I finally stepped away from the place that drained me, I learned something that should have been obvious. Walking back to people who undervalue you is not healing. It's reopening the wound. Healing meant choosing myself. It meant rejecting the version of me who kept waiting to be noticed, who kept hoping the company would finally see what I brought to the table. Healing meant understanding that I didn't need revenge to feel whole. I simply needed to reclaim the parts of me I had given away for free. And yes, sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, but sometimes silence, the silence of removing yourself, the silence of not returning, the silence of choosing peace, is the sharpest knife you will ever carry. Healing is not passive. It's active. It's choosing a life that doesn't require you to shrink. It's choosing environments that nourish you rather than consume you. It's choosing to let go of what hurt you without letting it take pieces of you on the way out. How to get started today. Acknowledge one situation where you've been giving more than you receive. Make one promise to yourself that protects your emotional or mental space. Take one small action, unfollow, decline, delay, that moves you toward peace. If this spoke to you, tell me in the comments what part hit hardest. Share this with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more stories like this.